This is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today radio program. We're coming to you live from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck. And what sort of specials do we have this evening, Gary?
Well, Dale, tonight is BAM night. It's $1 off on those big, it looks like about a 3-beer mug, so you don't want to be drinking more than one of those and be driving, I can tell you that much. Maybe even one's too much, but those are $1 off, $2 off an appetizer, so it's a good night to come on out, see the show up in the lights and watch you from down below. And
yeah, right.
I tell you're impressed with that one.
The gentleman you've been listening to is Gary Eminence. He's my co-host. We also have some guests with us this evening. We have Representative Glenn Froseth. He's a Republican from Kenmare. He's a retired newspaper editor and a longtime state legislator. We also have Senator John Warner. He's a Republican from Ryder. He represents.
I think he's a Democrat.
Excuse me. Yes. Beg your pardon.
Hey, I'm switching parties. We're making that announcement tonight.
Boy, I'm sorry about that. I was going to say he's a Republican from Ryder. He's chairman of chairman of the Senate Democratic Caucus, which is really nice. But Senator Warner is a Democrat. He's from Ryder. He represents District 4, which includes the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, and he is the chairman of the Senate Democratic Caucus, which is a leadership position amongst Democratic senators. And we're going to be speaking about energy impact in western North Dakota, specifically in Mountrail County. And first of all, we'd like to speak a moment about what's going on, what went on in the legislature today. In the House approved a $500 million corporate and individual income tax bill. It includes $361 million in tax cuts for individuals over 2 years. Almost all of the rest would go to as a corporate income tax cut. This is one of several tax bills that the legislature is going to be working on this week. They deal with property tax, income tax, sales tax, all manner of tax. There are some competing income tax proposals in the Senate that will have to be reconciled before the session ends. I think it's fair to say that we will have some sort of income tax reduction bill coming out of the legislature. We'll wait to see if it equals $500 million, which is what the House bill is. There was also final action on what has been known as the divorce bill. Originally, as it was introduced, it would have required a 6-month waiting period before a divorce could be granted after the action was filed, and it would have required some compulsory counseling for couples getting divorced if the couples had children. This was watered down quite a bit to require some education by a divorcing couple on the effects of divorce on a husband and wife, but at the end the bill was defeated anyway. We have in the House a series of gun bills that were approved. One of them, which was relatively non-controversial, says that the state and political subdivisions may not prohibit or restrict the use and handling of firearms or ammunition during a declared emergency. The government may not seize a gun, may not require registration, and may not essentially take away your gun during a emergency period. This has not happened in North Dakota, and there was some question about whether this bill was even necessary, but there were some instances in other states where firearms confiscation has been attempted during an emergency, and this was advertised as kind of a preventive bill that would prevent local governments from taking this kind of step. The other more contentious bills, one of them allows the carrying of a concealed gun in a church with the permission of church leaders. Another one allows the carrying of a concealed gun in a school with permission of the school board. In both of those cases, the license that one would need in order to carry a concealed weapon in a church or school is what's called a Class 1 license, which means you need to have some firearms training and some proficiency with a firearm, demonstrated proficiency, in order to do that. North Dakota has two types of concealed carry licenses. One of them is the one that requires some demonstration that you are proficient with a gun. The other one only requires that you pass an open book test on the firearms laws of North Dakota. You don't have to fire a gun. You don't have to show that you know how to shoot one.
Dale, I've got a quick question for you. I'm sorry to interrupt you there. The first bill you're talking about related to an emergency of taking the guns, did that pass?
No, it did not.
Did not, okay.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, it did. It did. This would prohibit the state or the local government from seizing firearms in the event of an emergency.
Any federal implications on that at all? I mean, if the states' rights related to that, or is there...
Well, all it means is the state authorities won't be doing this.
Gotcha.
It wouldn't affect the federal authorities if the FBI decided they want to try to disarm the city of Bismarck. I imagine they could give it a shot.
Okay, gotcha. That's
no
right.
pun
I appreciate
intended.
I wasn't sure there.
There is also one other gun bill that is more expansive than the other two I mentioned. It allows anyone who has a concealed weapons permit to carry a firearm at a public gathering, and what that's defined as is sports events, school functions, church suppers, political rallies, concerts. It also would allow someone to bring a gun into a public building, including the state capitol, which is an interesting bit to consider. And that's sort of a synopsis of what went on. Representative Froseth is fresh off the House floor because one of the things that is being done this week, as both the House and the Senate are working toward what's called the crossover break. They hope to go on a short vacation, if you can call it that, by Thursday or Friday, and the House and Senate both have to approve a number of bills or vote on a number of bills before this happens. And the House has more bills to deal with than the Senate, and so Representative Froseth was on the House floor until about 7 or 7:15 this evening voting on bills, and here he is this evening, and thank you for coming, Representative Froseth.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And Senator Warner, we'll start with you. Is there can you just describe to me what has the legislature done in order to address energy impacts in western North Dakota so far, and do you think that the efforts so far have been adequate?
It's been a long, slow push up the hill. You could call it Sisyphus, I guess. As soon as you get the rock up to the top of the hill, it's tumbling down again. We worked at this for several sessions. We're making some slow progress. I mean, by we, I mean we in the West. It's not a partisan issue. This is, but it's a very real educational process to convince our Eastern colleagues that there is something out there that needs to be done. We're doing it through tours. We're doing it by anecdote, by story, by really emphasizing the human aspects of what's going on out there and the human damage that's being done. We are making some progress. It's hard to tell within the context of the legislative session because we're so early on. We talk about crossover sometimes as the first half and the second half, but it's really
the first third.
It's the third half that's the critical portion, that conference committee portion, when we start having to reconcile what the House has done with what the Senate has done. Just looking from the outside, I think I'm more impressed with what's going on with regard to this in the House than I am with the Senate. The Senate has been a little bit timid on addressing some of the aspects of what's going on in the West, and so we're looking forward to what's coming over from the House. I think in some ways those are going to be the better vehicles, and that's where we're going to really make the attack.
Why do you say the Senate's been timid?
I think the appropriations process in the Senate has tended to be dominated by academics, the people with the big research universities, the big colleges. And it has, frankly, there's a very good rural presence in the Senate, but from the eastern part of the state, dealing with eastern issues, and they're very real issues. We recognize that, but there's been more emphasis on addressing the needs of the eastern part of the state in the Senate than in the West.
Representative Froseth, what is your assessment of how well the legislature thus far has handled the need for western North Dakota to have more attention paid in terms of the financing of road repairs and other items that deal with the impact of the oil industry on the region?
Well, coming from the West, one of the oil-producing counties, of course, the largest oil-producing, one of the largest ones is Mountrail County. And all during our campaign and during the interim, we basically lived and breathed return of financing to these counties so they could fix infrastructure. Infrastructure is deteriorating rapidly with the production of the oil. So it's been on our agenda all through the interim, and it's been one of the most important issues that we've had to deal with, coming from the western part of the state. Senator Warner touched on the complexities of this time of the season or the session. We've had a lot of bills in the House, and the Senate, of course, has been overwhelmed too. But at this point, we're not all that familiar on what the Senate is doing with their bills. Every time the budget section hears the bill, they can amend it, and it's different than what it comes out of our Tax and Finance Committee. So we're not fully in tune sometimes on what's happening even in our own House chambers till we see what the Appropriations Committee does with these bills. We've had some pretty complex bills that deal with oil and gas funding and changing the oil and gas tax formula, and also property taxes. We've had numerous amount of property tax bills that deal with reduction of property tax property tax relief or property tax reform. And I know the Senate has had several of those also. So at this point in the session, until the House passes the ones that they deem necessary to pass over to the Senate and vice versa, it's hard to know what we're actually dealing with.
How would you describe where the House is right now in terms of trying to reach a resolution on how to handle the property tax issue?
I think there's a couple different ways. 1319 is a big school funding formula bill, and that has the 75 mil buy-down, property tax buy-down proposal in it, the same as continuation of what we've done in the last two sessions. And it also has an additional 60 mil buy-down that I understand the Appropriations Committee has done some changing on that. But there will be like the 75 mil and anywhere from 20 to 60 mil in dollars accompanying that education bill. Plus we've got several bills that we haven't acted on yet that deal with property tax relief, and in total I think we're looking at probably some over $700 million worth of property tax relief that will be coming back to the property taxpayers in probably several different aspects. Some will come in the education funding bill, and some will come in a direct whether it be a reduction in the property taxes, state payment of a certain percent of property taxes. Those bills are still yet to be dealt with in our House chambers. We have about 75 bills yet to go in the next 3 days, and most of those are still forthcoming to us.
Senator Warner, what is your sense of how the Senate has attempted to handle the property tax issue thus far, and how effective do you think it's been?
We have argued for a long time in the Senate, particularly within the Democratic caucus, that we'd like to see a linkage between education funding and property tax. I think that for a long time we've been funding education, 21st century education, with an 18th century property tax, basically a process which was invented as old as the Republic, but really hasn't updated and kept track of modern technology and the modern movement of people across populations moving across the landscape. So we're very interested in seeing what the House, because the funding formula for education is in the House. We are going to be addressing, I'm reasonably sure there's broad bipartisan consensus that we do need property tax relief. I think we're getting fairly close and reaching some sort of consensus on the amount, but the exact structure is still to be worked out.
One of the things that, this happened in the House today. There was an extended debate about an income tax reduction bill, and it was fairly clear that the Democratic caucus in the House has adopted a strategy of that, first of all, the people are not that excited about income tax cuts, period. And also, they're particularly not excited about corporate income tax cuts, and that this money would be better devoted to property tax changes, relief, reform, whatever term one wants to use. I wanted to know what you thought about that as, frankly, as a political tactic. This is something that I think it's pretty easy to see it's being set up for the next campaign. As the Republicans make this choice, we as Democratic legislators make this choice, which we think is a wiser choice. How well do you think that's going to play with the electorate?
I would hope that we're not taking too much of the partisan considerations into the process. I know there's talk of it, and I know we did some talking in the back rooms about if there is a political advantage to this, but I think we're really just very concerned about long-term sustainability of property tax relief, and that any taxes that we give other than property tax are endangered. One of the things with property is that it can't move. It can't get out of the way. I mean, income can drift away, sales taxes can go down as sales go down. The property tax is kind of a sitting duck, and if these other taxes at some point take a downturn, property tax is going to be right there, and it's going to all of the efforts that we put into really for the last decade about giving some sort of property tax relief are going to come to naught. And so we want to make sure that we maintain the integrity of the fiscal system of this state, the three-legged stool, that we maintain that there is an income tax, that there is a sales tax, and that there is a property tax, because property is the one that can't get out of the way.
The gentleman whose voice you are hearing is Senator John Warner. He's a Democrat from Ryder, and he's the chairman of the Senate Democratic Caucus. We also have with us Representative Glenn Froseth, who is a Republican from Kenmare. And we also have, who's just joined us, Representative Kenton Onstead. He's a Democrat from Parshall and the leader of the House Democrats. Welcome, Representative Onstead. I'd just like to know from all three of you gentlemen, how has Montreal County and that whole region, how have things changed there in the last 5 years?
Well, first of all, Montreal County is the largest oil-producing county in the state of North Dakota, which 5 years ago they were barely considered an oil-producing county. And so if you take that rapid expansion alone, it's huge. The other thing that really affects Montreal County, other than, say, like Williams County or Ward County, Montreal County has no large cities. The largest city at that point was about 1,300 people. And so you take the rapid expansion, I would guess Stanley, within a radius of Stanley, they're probably looking at 3,000 to 4,000 people living at that. So imagine a community tripling in size in 5 years. What kind of stresses are put on the system? Not only your water, your streets, your ambulances, your fire department, your sheriffs, all those things are stress. And so that's not only just one city within the county. So have things changed? Well, yeah, they have. And it's all about trying to meet the demands and expectations that are being placed on those communities.
Senator Warner, what is your impression of how things have changed in the region in the last 5 years?
Well, I think we've had some very public discussions on the nature of highways and roads. The ones that I think haven't had enough discussion are on our water infrastructure, particularly in getting water into the region, which is traditionally, even though it has one of the largest river systems in the world running right through the middle of it, doesn't have very good access to that water. And on the other end of the equation, trying to figure out how to deal with the sewage generated by 5,000 new residents within the county.
How does one get better access to the lake and the river?
Well, it's an incredibly complex political situation because you have the three affiliated tribes who have water allocations and their own particular water rules. You have the Corps of Engineers, which controls the shoreline of the reservoir and controls the licensing and permits. You have the state of North Dakota, which owns the river channel itself. You have various jurisdictions. It seems like it falls right on the fault line of several different rural water districts, and now with WAS around the edges. all of them serve kind of around the edges, but they don't meet in the middle of Montreal County very well. And so there's some accommodations that are going to have to be made to pull all these various things back together.
Representative Froseth, how would you describe the changes that have happened in the region in the past 5 years, and how I'd also like you to talk a bit about the point that Senator Warner just raised about access to water from the river and the reservoir, and how that can be encouraged.
Well, first off, I'd kind of like to follow up on the point that Representative Onset brought up is the local community. Your emergency services, the fire department, and ambulance crews are all volunteer staff, and their calls have tripled or more. And you take all these people working at individual business places, and the business places are really good about allowing them to take time off to go answer a fire call or an ambulance call. But when they're called out 3 or 4 times as often as they have before, that puts a strain on not only their personal life, but the life of their employer and their employment. Their school system is, I'm not sure just how many new students they have. It's probably well over 100, 150 new students they're building onto to their school system again. Then they need more teachers, and teachers can't find a place to live. So, I mean, it stresses the whole community in different ways that have to be dealt with. Of course, we all know the roads and so on have been really taking a lot of pressure and strain and deteriorated really rapidly, and they don't have enough money to repair them, even to keep them maintained. The oil companies have been good in Montreal County, from what I know, that to help and repair necessary routes to their oil fields and so forth, but it isn't nearly enough to cover what they need.
We've been speaking to Representative Glenn Froseth, a Republican from Kenmare, whose voice you just heard. We also have with us Representative Kenton Onstead, who is a Democrat from Parshall and the House Democratic leader. We also have Senator John Warner, a Democrat from Ryder and the chairman of the House Senate Democratic Caucus. We'll be back in a moment with our second half hour. This is Dale Wetzel. We're broadcasting this evening the Legislature Today radio show from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck. We have as our guests Senator John Warner. He's a Democrat from Ryder, and he's the chairman of the Senate Democratic Caucus. We have Representative Kenton Onstead, who is the leader of the House Democrats, and he is a Democrat from Parshall. We also have Representative Glenn Froseth, who is a Republican from Kenmare. And on the phone, we have Montreal County Commissioner Greg Boucher. And Commissioner Boucher, today the Senate approved a Department of Transportation budget and also some energy impact grants. And I would just like for you to expound a moment, please, about the importance of state assistance in building up your infrastructure and how you might be able to avail yourself of some grant money from these energy impact grants.
Okay. Well, just for us there, just in Montreal County, I know with the last session we got about $42 million roughly from the governor's bill last time around, and we finally got to start putting some paved roads back together. We had torn up like 36 miles of paved road in our county and put them back to gravel, and that state funding, we got our first one repaved now in 2012, to start getting back to where we can get them 36 miles redone. So that state funding is huge for our county.
36 miles of paved road. How much of it have you been able to reconstruct?
We're at let's say we just started. We've probably got 10, I suppose, that we've redone.
And
put it this way: we didn't get to repave it right away. You got to rebuild the road because the roads are destroyed.
And how long?
So we rebuild, and then this spring we'll be paving one.
How long do you think it'll take to get these 36 miles of road back to the shape that you want them in?
Oh, we'll get probably half or so of them done this spring, and which will bring us. It'll take another another year or two, we'll be in pretty good shape on those. You know, because we're going to, depending on what funding comes through the state this year, but it's looking good at this point.
I was going to ask you, Commissioner Boucher, what has been your opinion of how the legislature has handled so far infrastructure needs, money for infrastructure needs for western North Dakota counties?
I guess if you go back, the bad part with the legislature is we're always behind. You know, we started, the oil hit here in 2006. We're making progress in 2012. You know, the last session was our first real, I'm going to say, 2 years ago was our first real progress we started to make. 2011, I guess it's only a year ago, but that was our real progress, and it's just, you get hit so hard, oil hits you just like a freight train. And there's no, it's so quick, you can't recover that quick. Oil doesn't come, there isn't this big planning process and they spend 5 years moving in and you get time to build for it. It's just here and you have a lot of makeup to do.
So how does one deal with the problem that the legislature is always a bit behind?
I guess you just keep working at it, going down there, pleading your case, and trying to get the people to listen and know what's going on out here. And it's been very beneficial. We worked with the governor's office 2 years ago, and, that was unprecedented to give the kind of money out they gave. And the other side of that, a lot of money going in. Our county puts in a lot of money into the state coffers, and, we need a formula change, and that's one of the things we got working on this session. And, progress is slow, but the other side of it is progress is good. Most of the outcomes have been positive.
What sort of formula change, sir, do you favor? And I presume you're referring to the formula that funnels some of the oil tax revenue back to local governments.
Yeah, the oil tax formula, the 5% production tax, it goes back to the counties. And what happened before is like Montreal County is the leading producer of oil. And once you hit a certain tax dollar amount, we were stuck at 10%. That's the amount we get. 10%, state gets 90. And there's a formula change going in this session in House Bill 1358, and that formula change will go to 25% back to the county. It's going to be a huge for us. We asked for that. Last session didn't get it, and if that goes through this time, it's going to be huge for us trying to make some catch-up time.
Representative Froseth, I wanted to ask you and Representative Onstad and Senator Warner about the efforts in the legislature to change oil taxation. There's a plan in the Senate, it's in the Senate now, that would reduce the top rate for oil taxation from 11.5% to 9.5%, and this would take effect in January of 2017. And there is some argument about do oil taxes need to be restructured or reduced? Is there a need for that at the present time? And I wanted to know what your opinion was of this subject.
Well, I guess the bill you're talking about in Senate, this one sponsored by Senator Cook, and I'm not sure what the status is of that bill at this time. We just passed one in the House today that was prime sponsor was Representative Drubdahl from Arnegard, and that restructures the tax policy. So if the oil production reaches 800,000 barrels a day, the tax goes down from 11.5% to 11%. If it reaches 900,000 barrels a day, it goes down to 10.5%, and if it goes to 1 million barrels, it goes down to 10%. So it's a 1.5% reduction. And the bill also takes out pretty much all existing exemptions. So when you remove all those exemptions for like the first 75,000 barrels of production, the extraction tax is exempt. When you remove all those exemptions and lower the tax, the rate of 10% is about a wash, because that's actually about the true tax that's being levied now when you take into regard all the extra exemptions we offer. That has been offered in the present structure, so it's about revenue neutral.
Do you think that your constituents will accept the idea that there needs to be a restructuring of North Dakota's oil tax?
Well, I think so. I think the present tax structure is so confusing, most people don't understand it because there's so many different types of exemptions in it, and the 5%, that's another thing the bill does. Now we have a 5% gross production tax that's basically in lieu of the property tax that oil companies have to pay on their equipment and so forth. And then a 6.5% extraction tax. And if the oil price drops, there's a trigger price in the formula. If the oil price drops below $52.50 a barrel, the extraction tax goes away. So all we receive is a 5% production tax. Drovdal's bill also removes that trigger, so there is no two-tiered. There's basically a two-tiered system on how the tax is distributed, but there's not a two-tiered system on how it's collected. So that would guarantee that the tax would drop no lower than 10%, no matter what the price of oil does.
Senator Warner, what do you believe that there is a need to restructure North Dakota's oil taxation?
I think this is being portrayed a lot of times as a very confusing oil tax structure when it really isn't. That there is the issue of stripper wells, and taxes on stripper wells. That's really the only issue. There's a number of old artifacts, a number of triggers left over in the tax code, but they're set at levels which would be uneconomic for oil wells within the Bakken anyway. And I think that right now we're in a national and international recession. Oil prices are still very high. I think the expectation for oil prices is only to go higher should the world and the United States start coming out of this recession and demand pick up for oil. And so I think that those old trigger prices, which were artifacts of trying to revive production in the 90s and the early 2000s, are really obsolete. They need to go away, but they're not really influencing the policy at all. The one issue which is relevant is the stripper well, and in particular the stripper property exemption.
And could you explain, please, what is a stripper well and what is the disagreement about how to tax stripper wells?
I'm going to rely a little bit on Kenton to fill in.
A stripper well is adopted in all the oil-producing states and across the union. Basically, have stripper wells. When the production of a stripper well gets to be a certain level, a lot of companies would look at it that it was no longer feasible to produce that well, and they would give up chase. And so a smaller company would take it over, and they would continue to pump it. Because they're a small company, their costs and so on were feasible. And so we looked at that as being an incentive to keep pumping that well, and then because it still provided a few jobs. Over time and over years, it's just not the small companies that have stripper wells. Continental Resources is not considered a small company, and they have probably over 30% of the stripper wells in the state of North Dakota. So it takes that portion away. The other thing is any industry keeps improving their technology, and the ability to improve those technologies comes in there. So once you prove the production on that particular well, of course, there's additional revenue that comes back to you. The problem that we have in the state of North Dakota initially is that we do not recertify stripper wells. We're the only state in the union that has no recertification process of stripper wells.
And can you explain what is certification of a stripper well?
Well, recertification of stripper well is basically if once the production gets to for a certain number of months below, and I'll use 15 barrels a day, it gets below the 15 barrels a day, then it becomes a stripper well, and then there's no extraction tax paid on that stripper well. Okay, so when you make improvements on that well, the recertification process would say that every year you recertify that well. So now that well has been improved, made some improvements, and is now doing 75 barrels a day. Is it still a stripper? Well, in the North Dakota law, it still is. You still no extraction tax, but all the improvements have been made to that well, and there's nothing paid. So, number one, to address the stripper thing, we need some recertification in there. When it kicks in and when it kicks out, that's another debate, but we need to recertify wells, and that's the only way we'll get out of that loophole.
Representative Froseth, what do you think about the handling of stripper wells in any sort of oil tax reform legislation?
Well, in regard to the stripper wells, there was a problem we encountered with the Bakken and the horizontal wells is the stripper wells were individually designated as a stripper well before, and now when they started drilling into another formation, the Bakkens, any well that was drilled in that spacing unit was also included in that stripper well unit, so it received the same designation. So any new well in the Bakken well was drilled in that same spacing unit. If it dropped below the 30 barrel a day production, it would also be considered a stripper well, and that wasn't really an intention of the original designation of stripper wells. Stripper wells, basically, all the older ones are wells that have been, it's secondary production. Those wells would have normally went out of production, but some companies gone in there and reworked them and spent quite a bit of money in reworking them and got the production back up. That's why they were given that stripper well status and the extraction tax exemption to kind of offset the cost of keeping that well alive and a productive well.
Is there sentiment in your district, in your region, for revamping oil taxation?
You know, I don't hear a lot of people talk about it. I guess I think people would be more than happy to still collect the 11.5% tax and see it coming in. I guess as long as oil companies are willing to pay it. I guess one of the arguments about lowering it is that there's a lot of new oil shale formations in play in other states. Texas was one, and California now is looking at a big shale play in there that might produce, one article I read, as much as 400 billion barrels of oil. And there are other states that probably oil production is a lot cheaper to obtain than North Dakota. And I think if the companies don't get some break in their taxation and some of the oil policies we have, they might not deem it, if the oil price goes down, they probably won't deem it feasible to stay in North Dakota and be moving out of the state into other states. That's the argument for reducing the taxes somewhat.
One of the things that there hasn't been a lot of talk about during the session is how oil revenues are divided with the three affiliated tribes, depending on the location of a well, whether it's on tribal trust land or whether it's on fee land, which basically means privately owned land. Representative Onstead and Senator Warner, could you just tell me is there anything going on along those lines in terms of efforts to, the tribes have said that they want essentially a larger share of the oil tax revenue that results from production on the reservation. Is this going to happen in your judgment?
Well, I don't think I'm telling any tales when I say that Senator Wardner, the Senate Majority Leader, had been in early negotiations with Tex Hall, the tribal chairman, and to see if they could reach some sort of consensus, and if they reached a consensus, to introduce legislation before the bill deadlines. I do know that those negotiations fell apart. One of the issues here is that there's a decided shift in the direction of oil drilling on the reservation, away from fee land and toward trust land, which means that the tribe's share just naturally will go up a lot. The expected revenues for the tribe are much higher than they have been. The tribe uses numbers now which indicates probably 3 or 4 to 1 dollars to the state for every dollar that's gone to the tribe, and they're upset about that. And I understand some of that. I do know that those negotiations fell apart. We had been called in. We've been involved on the edge of those negotiations, both Representative Onstead and I, but not indirectly. We've been around on the edges. There still is talks going on with the governor's office and the majority leaders and the minority leaders in both chambers. If there is some consensus, we still have the delayed bills process. We could introduce a delayed bill and address the issue. But as far as I know, we're not moving very far in that direction.
Part of the situation that occurs, we give dollars back to the counties, basically assist with roads, part of our formula. But three affiliated tribes, they don't get near the dollars the deal for the 3 affiliate tribes and their roads and deal with that one. We hold that tax and a certain percentage that comes back to 3 affiliate tribes, but they'll tell you that they have 1,100 miles of tribal roads. Of that 1,100 miles, and they might be considered BIA roads, the BIA only provides about $2 million project for those roads. Now, those roads are impacted just like any other county, and you put that to metal, and so that's the request for additional funding to come from the state so they can have more assistance with those roads. The request really comes from tribal land and tribal minerals and so on, and the argument is, well, we give a few services back to the tribes, but not as much as what considers a local county entity. And so if you want to look at fairness in that way, we collect a tax, it comes back, and so they have some needs, and they have provide that way, and they have communities, Mandaree, White Shield, Twin Buttes, all part of that formula where we contribute to counties, goes to cities like Parshall, Newtown, and so on. They're on the reservation as well. They have needs, yes they do. They have demands and increases in impact and so on. So it's kind of like come back. Let's relook at the whole thing again. We created a structure that way. Let's look at the whole thing and see what's dollars, because we're seeing quite a bit more impact now within the reservation boundary. So that's the request from 3 affiliate tribes. Let's relook at the workup.
Representative Froset, have you been involved at all in these talks?
No, I haven't.
Our sponsor for this hour is the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties. And I would like each of you gentlemen to talk about how this association helps you in your work in terms of advancing issues that are important to your constituents.
Well, I think they offer us a lot of insight in what's actually happening in the oil patch right now today, and the needs of the counties. And it's just helpful information they bring forth that helps us decide and make decisions on the legislation we have before us.
What's the nature of the information that they give you?
Well, actually, it's I guess we get a breakdown on what needs are out there in the various counties, and also what to expect in the future, what the county commissioners and what the Association of Counties in a whole are dealing with, and what their projected plans are in the coming years, what they expect the oil industry is going to do for them and in their counties and so forth.
Representative Onstead, how has this the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties been helpful to you in your work?
Well, it's helpful for the counties because they all come together and then they become a stronger body, because they probably work through a single voice, all portion of that part of it. So as far as the county's perspective, it's good when it comes to the legislature and so on. They have this group, and this group isn't just newly formed. The Association of Oil Counties has been a group for many years, and back in the oil 80s and so on, and they formed that portion of that. They got some improvements to accept 105.5 versus 80,000 pound load limits within the rest of the parts of the state. So there were some things that they did early on to recognize the oil development and working on formulas and so on. So it's probably not so much from us, because we hear directly from county commissioners what they have. Is for the counties to get together as a group, and then they can discuss their thoughts. It's kind of like League of Cities. They all come together, and what's the major things that happen? Well, here you have the Association of Counties that they look in there and what's the impacts that we have. So now they can compare their notes. Okay, let's work out a rationale to try and come together to the state legislature and what they need to approach.
One of the things that I've been so impressed with the Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties is just in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen some aggressive new leadership in the organization. And we've seen one of the things that's come out of that leadership is a visioning process, a series of community meetings where they actually go into communities, they hold public forums, and they start developing communities and developing projects. The idea of really starting to organize it at the grassroots level. We're used to seeing the organization work at a higher level, where it's working with the county commissioners and legislators, but to really be involved as it's becoming to be in the grassroots, I think is a very positive outcome.
If you're going to explain the legislative session in 20 seconds to someone about how it's been, like the mood of it, what would you say? Representative Froseth.
I'd say it's been awfully busy. And I think the one thing I've noticed that's different this year, I think we have a lot of bills that are trying to accomplish probably the same thing in a little bit different angle, a little bit different manner, a little bit different funding mechanism, or more funding or less funding or whatever. But it seems like there's a lot of bills in this that deal with the same issues that have to be sorted out. And these bills are both on the House and Senate side, so it's hard to determine what the Senate is passing on to us and what we're passing on to the Senate, I guess.
Senator Warner, what do you think?
Well, I think I alluded to it earlier. I think what we're seeing in the West is a quality of infrastructure discussion. We're starting to see the way we develop the industry. What we're seeing in the East is a quality of place. There's a growing realization that North Dakota can add to its quality of life and its quality of place, particularly in East, where you have institutions to receive new buildings, the development of commerce in the East. I think that we need to make that transition in the West as well.
We'll have to ask Representative Onstead in the future what he thinks about the answer to that question. We've been talking to Representative Kenton Onstead, a Democrat from Parshall. He's the House Republican leader, and also Senator John Warner and Representative Glenn Froseth. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.